Hello, Erica here, and today we are going to talk about short stories. I am a huge fan of the short story as a form in literature, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about how to get into short stories, how I rate short story collections, and just chat a little bit about short stories. This video was requested by a viewer who is a lovely human, and thank you, Bruno, for requesting this video because I am more than thrilled to make it. So I understand that a lot of people struggle with short story collections. A lot of people struggle to get into them, they struggle to read them, they struggle to rate them, they're not really sure what to do with them, and they just don't like them. And that's okay, and I don't hate you if you don't like short stories. Like, we can't all like the same things, then BookTube would be a really boring place. I think there are a few reasons why people struggle with short stories, and again, I'm just hypothesizing here, I don't really know. I think that short story collections are easy to put down. There's a lot of breaks in narrative, and once you put it down, to pick it back up, it's like starting a whole new book all over again because you're diving into another short story. So that can kind of bring an element of drudgery to reading a short story collection, which is understandable. I also feel like short stories, at least the short stories that I enjoy and the short stories that I feel like are most well written, are not always wrapped up very nicely and neatly, which is fine with me because I am a huge fan of like messy, open-ended endings to stories. I like stories that leave me thinking about the possibilities of what just happened, what could happen. I like that. A lot of people like their stories to end and for them to be over, though. And I feel like it's hard to do that with a short story, and sometimes the point of a short story is to just get the reader thinking about what could have happened, what might have happened to these characters after the story ended. So I feel like people do struggle with that element of short stories as well. Any reason that you have for not liking to read short story collections is perfectly legitimate. And like I said, I'm not going to lecture people about why they should always be reading short story collections. I just wanted to share my experience. I personally have not always loved short stories. It's been about 2 years since I started to explore the form, and it wasn't until just last year that I started to really appreciate and love short story collections. There were two short stories that really made me change my mind about how I felt about short stories. The first one is The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, which I will talk about all the time, and it is a really incredible story. If you have not read it, please just go read it. It leaves so many questions unanswered. There's so much to think about. It's so shocking. It tells about so many different societal fears and themes in so few pages. It's incredible. Please go read it. The second one is not quite as famous, and it is a short story by Ernest Hemingway called The End of Something. It is in his collection In Our Time. This is the first short story collection that I read for myself, and that wasn't assigned reading for a class. And I thought I was going to hate it. I actually started it, picked it up, and put it down multiple times over the period of like a year. And then I finally just sat down and read it, and I devoured it. And I loved it. And it's part of the reason why I love Hemingway as well as why I love short stories. But the story, The End of Something, is a really short story. It is like 5 pages. And it's just about Nick Adams. Hemingway does a lot of stories around this one character called Nick Adams, and his girlfriend Marjorie, and kind of how they end their relationship. And I just thought it was really beautiful, and it really hit me very hard in the heart at that time of my life. And again, I found it incredible that something so short could make me feel so many things and make me think about so many things. So that's kind of how I got into short stories. Last year, I did kind of a challenge to myself where I was trying to read one short story collection a month. I stopped having to do that because I naturally will pick up short story collections now. I've explored the genre enough. I found a lot of authors that I like. I've found authors that are similar to the authors that I like, and I continue to explore. I'm by no means an expert, though. I just really do enjoy the form. The other thing that I see a lot and that I think people have difficulty with is how to rate a short story collection succinctly, like how to give it a star rating. First of all, nobody's making you give a star rating to everything. You don't have to do that. Second of all, I see a lot when people review short story collections or when they talk about a short story collection they read, they're like, some stories were great, some stories were not so great, so I gave the whole collection 3 stars, which is fine. And I'm not here to tell you how to rate books. I have never, I don't think, read a short story collection where I absolutely loved every single story, and every single story was a 5-star story. That's never happened for me. And it's not going to happen. And it's the same way where if you sat down and read 10 novels, not all of them would speak to you the same way, and you wouldn't have the same enjoyment from each and every one of those 10 novels. You can't expect that to happen with a short story collection. And it depends on where you are in your life, what kind of mood you are in, what the author's writing about, how closely related the stories in the collection are. But I think that there are other things that you need to consider when rating a short story collection. There are other things that I consider when rating a short story collection other than how much enjoyment I got out of every story. This, by the way, is much easier to do with collections that have been curated as a collection as opposed to like an author's complete short stories or selected stories. But I do like to think about whether there were themes that were universal and kind of tied the stories together. I really appreciate collections that do that, and I really appreciate authors who explore the same themes through a variety of stories and narrative voices. I also like to look at whether I felt like the narrative voice sounded or read similarly throughout the collection, or whether there was a variety of narrative voices, and whether or not that worked for me, whichever way the author chose to go. Sometimes the author can take a narrative voice that sounds very similar across a variety of short stories, and it works really well if the stories have enough substance to them, but sometimes that can fall really flat and get really boring. And then sometimes I feel like an author can have a wide variety of narrative voices throughout their stories, and sometimes that can be a really cool experience, but sometimes it can be kind of a jumbly mess and a little bit jarring. So I like to see how the author has worked with the narrative voice and whether it works however the author chose to do it, whether it makes the collection feel whole and complete. And that's another thing. I do like to think about, are there any stories that I would have just totally left out of the collection, that were jarring, that didn't fit, that didn't make sense with the rest of the stories? Because that could be something that could knock a short story collection down for me as far as star ratings go. Those are some things I like to think about, not only when I'm rating a short story collection, but when I'm reflecting on it and when I'm reviewing it, because I think that a short story collection, it's a sum of its parts. You can't pick it apart and choose what you like and choose what you didn't like. You also have to look at it as a whole, because it's been published as a collection for a reason. And it's a whole book that way for a reason. Whereas if you were to just read one short story, it'd be a lot easier to kind of quantify and qualify what you liked and didn't like about it. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm feeling a little rambly. I have previously made a video with some of my favorite short story collections, which I will link down below. I will also link some reviews that I've done on short story collections if you're interested in checking them out. And very soon I will be doing a video on short story collections for people who are scared of short stories. But if you have any questions about reading short stories, if you love them, if you hate them, if you have any recommendations for me, if you are looking for recommendations, please let me know in the comments. I would love, love, love to talk about this. If you would like to talk about how you rate short story collections, why you started reading short stories, any of that, please let me know. I, again, love talking to you guys. And I will see you tomorrow. Bye!